small card shop in the heart of Japan to a multi-billion-dollar empire, just how did Nintendo do it? Did they rise from nothing, keeping a clean sheet, or did they get assistance from local organised crime? And if that's the case, are Nintendo still involved with the Yakuza today? The story starts long ago, the mid-16th century to be exact. Portuguese traders would sail to Japan, initiating trade deals, bridging Japan and the Western world together. In exchange for the silks and sake, Portugal dealt them playing cards and in turn, card gambling. They were hooked. Gambling had them in a chokehold. Legal gambling would soon come crashing down though, as with all things from the Western world. In the year 1633, the Edo shogunate closed off all Western trade, closing off the borders, outlawing all Western influences, that including gambling. In retaliation to this, people created their own versions of the standard deck of cards, derived from the Portuguese designs except they had no numbers. Instead, having artful designs is to not bear any resemblance to the Western counterparts, skirting the law. During this period, many alternate decks were produced, most notably Kabufuda of the bunch, which was used to play a game called Oichokabu, similar to Baccarat or Blackjack for us. Underground gambling houses would be formed by groups of people who after this wanted to expand the business into loan sharking, theft and smuggling. The seeds of organised crime were sowed. The group had no formal name yet, so they set out to create one. They named themselves after the most worthless hand possible in Oichokabu, 8, 9 and 3, pronounced Yakuza. There were two groups that predated the Yakuza. The gamblers were named Bakuto, thieves Takiya. They would merge into the one we know today. I'm sure they won't try anything stupid in the 90s. When the government discovered that the cards were being used to gamble, they would promptly ban them. New cards with new designs would take their place. A cat and mouse game would ensue between the gamblers and the government, who would give up first. After what seemed like an eternal war, the Bakuto forced the government's hand, creating deck after deck, and in 1971 they outright banned the cards due to their ties with gambling. However, as you probably would have guessed, business would continue as usual. The people threw away their money hoping to eventually live out their dreams of opulence. Fast forward to 1885, after nearly a century of illegal card production during the Meiji period, the government lifted the ban on playing cards. A fresh new market now open for business. A newcomer steps into the ring, someone who you could say had pipe dreams. A young card player saw the potential for a new set of cards that were legal, that he could sell in stores to gamblers alike. A man named Fusajiro Yamauchi. In 1989, he would release Hanafuda cards, the first product from his newly established company, Nintendo. Hanafuda was an instant hit, the cards flying out of stock quicker than they could produce them, so fast in fact that they had to ramp up production by hiring more people as the cards were painstakingly handmade. Not long after, a new clientele would take an extreme interest in Hanafuda, a clientele more in line with the other side of the law. This was the beginning of Nintendo's ties with the Yakuza. This is when the story takes a more sinister turn. The Yakuza, rather unsurprisingly, turned out to be massive fans of Hanafuda. The cards could be used to play Oichokabu. All they had to do was discard the last 2 months of the set. Gambling was back on the table, all hands on deck. You see, gambling was a big deal for the Yakuza, a way to harvest revenue from bettors, a way to make connections with the rich who gambled for fun and potentially extort them. It was a full-blown ordeal, not just an activity for fun. It was a pretty safe racket as far as things go. You want to run to the police because they took your cash? You couldn't, because you were the one gambling, or because you would have been dealt with swiftly, as there were no doubts a few police were on payroll. Once you were in the business, you weren't getting out, at least without friction. Just like casinos now, they took cheating very seriously. The house, under no circumstances, could be cheated out of their honest work. The Yakuza were extremely paranoid about the Hanafuda cards being tampered with, so much so that they opened up a new deck for every game. This obsession with fairness cost them a ton, and made Nintendo raking even more than they could have imagined. Nintendo were already manufacturing them in substantial quantities, and now they had to make even more, just to keep up with the Yakuza's demands. But I doubt they minded, their profits going through the roof, enough so to justify opening a second store. The alternative would have been likely a lot more bloody, and they would have ended up manufacturing more of them anyway, to avoid future interventions. As long as the cards kept being dealt, both were making money, and as far as Nintendo were concerned, they weren't directly involved with the mob per se, they were just the manufacturers, operating within the scope of the law. Hanafuda would stay popular within the Yakuza up until around the mid-40s, before they shifted the primary focus onto other rackets. This was quite well timed for Nintendo, their artisans retiring around this time, all whilst World War II was ravaging the economy. People, understandably, just weren't interested in expensive playing cards at this moment in time. After the war was over, Nintendo would shift ownership to Yamauchi's grandson, Hiroshi Yamauchi. His goal was to bring Nintendo into the modern world, with new ideas. They started mass manufacturing plastic cards, as well as venturing into other businesses such as instant rice, children's toys, and even a taxi company. The Yakuza, still running rampant throughout Japan, didn't exactly have any interest in these markets, although they probably did take the taxis once or twice. Saying that, they did seem to take an interest in one of Nintendo's newest ventures, the rumoured operation of love hotels. Love hotels, as I'm sure you will have guessed, are private spaces that are rented to couples for some closed-off intimacy and alone time. I don't fancy losing revenue detailing this, so I'll just leave it there. Initially, the Yakuza wanted to strike a deal with Nintendo to rent out the hotels to carry out their dealings, from handling business transactions to running gambling dens and prostitution rings. Allegedly, Nintendo, wanting to keep their family-friendly image as a result of their children's toys, didn't agree to a partnership. The Yakuza would operate in them anyway at the standard rate, since who were Nintendo to say no? It was the Yakuza after all. You don't say no to them if they come knocking at your door. It would guarantee money for Nintendo anyway, all they had to do was turn a blind eye. It's not like they had any hand in the activities taking place. The straw soon broke the camel's back though. Nintendo had enough of the business when the clients started running gambling circuits out of them, potentially using their own cards no less. It was too risky of a business to run, a ticking time bomb with too many strings attached. So Nintendo sold up shop and prioritised R&D into the hot new up-and-coming sector, electronic entertainment. After developing smaller electronic game devices such as the Game & Watch, they finally flipped the industry on its head with the Famicom, single-handedly saving the video game industry from the infamous crash of 1983. Their empire was established, they found their home, they've laid the bed in video games, a far departure from anything Yakuza related, since up until this point they had no skin in the video game industry. Or at least they thought. Nintendo would release the Famicom worldwide to universal praise, rebranding it as the NES. Nintendo strong-armed the third generation of consoles into submission, and Nintendo didn't plan on pulling the brakes yet. They were out to repeat history a second time with the next console. This time around, however, they had a few more hurdles, a few more unauthorized business partners interested in the next release, the techier. Just like the mafia in the States, the Yakuza had their fingers in every pie, from labour unions to port workers, pocketed politicians to barbers. You name a business, they were in it. Chances there still are. So when they got wind of Nintendo's upcoming console, the Super Nintendo, they wanted to leverage their coverage and organise a plan to intercept the delivery of the consoles, stealing them for themselves before they even got to storefronts, limiting the supply and driving up demand. After this, they would then have the techier peddle off the supply at overinflated prices. They could do this as they would have controlled who had them in stock. Because they became the courier, no matter who you wanted to buy one off, it would have meant profit for the Yakuza. So the plan is set. Midnight November 21st, 1990. Quick job, in and out operation. No one gets hurt, the people still get the console. Easy profit, right? Wrong. Along the pipeline, someone squealed, a whistleblower, a rat perhaps. Someone let the plan out, that's all that matters. Nintendo knows the Yakuza's intent. Hopefully they still had the pinky finger, because part of it's getting lapped off with a chisel later. The Yakuza still had to carry on though. The plan was already in motion. It's too late to back out. 300,000 of the Super Famicoms on the line. Nintendo simply couldn't allow for this to happen. If the biggest project ever up until this point failed, the company would lose their footing and reputation, abdicating their throne to Sega. That would have been worse for them rather than temporary lost profits. In a move of defense, Nintendo devised their own counterplan, dubbed Operation Midnight Shipping. The plan was built on the basis of each worker only knowing what to do next, nothing more. Once the consoles were built, they were packaged in blank boxes or disguised as other items as to not garner attention from prying eyes. To To make them even more difficult to track, only a few higher-ups knew what times the trucks were arriving/departing. Not even the logistics team knew, they just had to crack on with the jobs off-beat. The drivers would pick up the consoles from the depot, only knowing their delivery schedules and drop-off points. They didn't know what they were delivering or the value of the goods, nor were they allowed to check. They would arrive at odd times with no rhyme or reason, so that their delivery patterns couldn't be recognised and intercepted. The next step, courtesy of the couriers, was to then deliver the Super Nintendos to the storefronts, where the owners would unload them hastily with eyes in the back of the head. After all is said and done, the shopkeepers would rest with one eye open, anxiously awaiting the big day. No Yakuza involvement, no theft, no lost profits. Unfortunately, this is only in theory. They were not able to test the plan as launch day was approaching quickly. They had no other choice except success. This plan had to work. So in the early hours of the morning, November 21st, 1990, Nintendo executed the plan, hoping for a smooth operation of what is the most nail-biting scenario they've ever been in, the past run-ins with the Yakuza not even registering on the same scale. The trucks were loaded one by one, off-kiltered schedules just like they planned. They were sent off, the drivers paranoid about what they were shipping, a necessary evil. Soon after departure, some lost contact. Nintendo just had to hope for the best tomorrow, and that no missing shipments were reported. Not one delivery lost, not a single Super Famicom stolen. The plan worked flawlessly, without a hitch. The Yakuza left the streets empty-handed, they failed miserably. All 300,000 units sold within a few hours, about $60 million at the time. Nintendo would go on to sell 49 million of the Super Nintendos, raking in cash by the boatload. The rest is history, going on to release even bigger and better games and consoles, the business stronger than ever, even creating their own theme park based on their own games. As for the Yakuza, as of right now, they've not targeted Nintendo directly since the incident, their operations dying down over time as the government imposed more laws and regulations disincentivizing the Yakuza lifestyle, as well as the rise of modern surveillance making the rackets harder to carry out in the public eye, in turn driving them back into the underground. The brink of the millennium provided the nail in the coffin for Nintendo's long and complex relationship with the Yakuza. A century-long bond broken at last. If we can learn anything from this, it's that the house always wins, no matter what.